Hello, welcome to the Powerful Introvert podcast. I'm Greg Weinger. Today's guest here is Claire Alvis, founder of Silent Partner Consulting, where she helps ambitious businesses turn complexity into clarity and sustainable growth. Claire has been an operations executive at multiple tech companies, including Deliveroo, as she focuses on strategic clarity, scalable systems, and transformational leadership. Claire also writes the Substack newsletter, Shine Unfiltered, where she explores authenticity in leadership and how to turn quiet expertise into visible impact. So glad to have you on the show today. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it is through Substack that we met. There are lots of writers on there trying to start a following, which I'm among them. I came across Claire and a post, and I was so interested in her writing. It's really compelling, well written, has really excellent graphics. You can tell me the story. You said it was a slight cheating on the graphics, but not to me. I mean, they're super compelling and well thought out. It's using some software to support it, but it really helps communicate the message. And the message very much resonates with the reason we're here on the Powerful Introvert podcast. So really glad to have you here.
No, thank you. And yeah, you're right. It's a wonderful tool. It's called Napkin. If you're ever looking for something to go and help you design a graphic, it's really useful. So we're happy to share it.
We'll get an affiliate link and drop it in the show notes and get you some credit. So Claire, tell me a little bit about your career trajectory. How did you get started in that field?
Sure. I suspect my story is slightly less common because I didn't kind of come to tech that's what I wanted to do. I started out working in TV. And I worked in live TV production for the first few years of my career. Super fun, really interesting world, but very hard. Like the pay is tough and the hours are tough. And as a woman, as you get older, if you want to go and have children or stuff like that, it just gets very difficult. I decided that I wanted to do something different. And I was really interested in how businesses worked and were built. And that's how I found my way into startups. I wasn't really interested in going to work for a big corporation, although I ended up working for Deliveroo as it grew into what became a very big organization. Mm-hmm. When I joined Deliveroo, it was really by chance. It was because my background was actually in food. By then, I'd done some work in TV that was in live cooking shows. And then I went into restaurants for a little bit, and they really wanted someone who had a good background in restaurants. So that was how I found my way into tech. It was absolutely nothing to do with my technical skills or my knowledge of business. It was all to do with the fact that I knew restaurants.
Yeah, that's a great set of experience just working in the entertainment field. My wife did as well. Tell me a little bit about how being an introvert factored in earlier in your career and then as it progressed into your tech career.
It's interesting because I don't know that I would describe myself as an introvert. I think I'm someone who's always struggled with confidence. I think outwardly people would probably just say, oh, you're quite confident, because I'm quite good at going in and being like, ha, and sort of projecting this aura of, don't worry, I've got it all together. But the reality is, in my head, there's a huge amount of doubt and imposter syndrome and you're not good enough to be here. I think a lot of that comes from this idea that I haven't had one career experience. I'm not the person who can say, you know, I've done 10 startups now, like I've grown this from here to here. You know, I worked in TV and then I worked in restaurants and then I did some startups, and some of those startups were mad success, like Deliveroo, and some of them fizzled into nothing, like the last one I worked for. And I think that for me is this idea of introverted, but it's more kind of inner introverts. Like I'm able to sort of go in and say, oh yeah, I've done this. But inside I'm like, oh, I don't think you have. I'm probably coming across as slightly psychotic here. That's the way my mind.
No, I think that's a really common experience. And imposter syndrome is such a real thing, and it cuts across different personality types. People are quiet for one reason or another. And the more people I talk to, there are just more reasons. Some of them might be due to personality type. But there's always a reason to feel like you're not good enough or to knock yourself down. That's more universal. So a lot of people find themselves in that situation. Then we'll get into what do we do about that in a little bit. But, you know, at a certain point, you found your footing and you transitioned into leadership roles. So what was going on at that time?
I guess a bit like anyone, you sort of start to work up the career ladder and you start to understand the more senior you get, the more visibility you get. And sorry, by visibility, I don't mean visibility of me. I mean visibility of what goes on in the company. And for me, I was always desperate to know, like, how do the decisions get made? Why are they making that decision? What's the stuff that I'm not seeing that when you're lower down, you just get told, oh, by the way, this is happening. And we'll give you a reason, but it's not going to be the full reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really started to kind of work my way up through leadership positions to try and figure that out, because that's what really interested me. And I guess, again, to feed into your question around sort of introvert, because that was my motivation, not necessarily the title or prestige that came with it. It meant that whilst I was really happy to get those promotions and to sort of climb up the ladder, I guess I was feeling like, am I the right person to be here, or am I just here because I really want to know more? Which in itself is silly, right? Because that's exactly the kind of people that you do want to be there, because curiosity is a great thing to have as a leader. It brings these questions into you of like, yeah, but that person's done these 5 things and I don't have that. Like, are they better than me?
Right. So you're really drawn to this out of curiosity, and you're just going where your curiosity leads. It's not out of, I just need to be bigger or something like that. And then you suddenly find yourself in a situation where it's interesting. You talk about visibility, because it's really 2 ways. You get so much more of a picture, a clear picture of the company and why we're doing what we do and all that. But it also works the other way, that it's a 2-way mirror. The spotlight is on you more because you're responsible for more, and people are looking to you for making decisions and that sort of thing. It sounds like you had a bit of a reckoning at that point of, oh, yeah, I find myself in this position suddenly.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Deliveroo was particularly an eye-opening experience, because it was at that point getting a much bigger company. And my role went from being a UK focus to a global focus role. And all of a sudden I was having to work with people who were at least as senior as me, and in most cases were more senior than me. And then it was really about, okay, well, how do I come in and say, like, actually this way is better, when I felt like they had the right to laugh me out the room? And that's wrong, right? Like, no one should ever feel like that. And that's a lot of kind of my internal demons that I needed to work through. I was 27, 28 years old when I was doing that. But that is kind of how I felt. And that's one of the challenges I found with that kind of leadership role.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people earlier in their career, or as they're transitioning into leadership, it's a theme that comes almost by definition as you're doing something that you haven't done before each time you take on a larger scope role. And growth companies are just fantastic for creating opportunities like that. That's one reason I've spent my time in growth stage companies, and why I recommend that to anyone who is super curious, because there's an endless smorgasbord of opportunities oh, I could do this thing. I've never done that before. Or, here's a new situation that's chaotic and crazy. So you're put in this uncomfortable position, and you started to develop a leadership style that was more authentic to you. And so could you describe that?
I think the thing that has worked for me throughout my career, and I think it's the way I've got comfortable with myself now, is I'm not going to go in and pretend to be someone I'm not. Equally, I'm not going to go in and pretend I have all the answers. And I think the way I found that for me leadership worked would be to go in with humility and honesty and be like, look, this is what I think. We've done this, it works. Here's the data to prove it. You're different. So I appreciate that not everything I say is going to work 100% for you, that it did for another person. And that's kind of my approach to things, leading with a bit of, I don't have all the answers. I believe no one has all the answers. And so that's the way I find it's easier to talk to people one-on-one.
That's a great way to approach it. It's data driven. It's coming from a place of fundamental humility. You know what you know, but there's also an assertiveness and a confidence in that, where it's like, this is my view, and you're challenging people to prove you wrong. bringing people along too, because you're telling a story and showing the picture with your thinking and your data.
Yeah. And I think I'd find it really hard to go into a room and say, like, this is it. This is the way, because I fundamentally don't believe that that's true of any situation. Do I think you should make 12 different processes for 12 different countries because all of them have slightly different nuances? Absolutely not. That way chaos lies. But I do believe that people have the right to kind of walk up to things and say, 99% of that works. I'm worried about that 1%, and pull that through with them. And sometimes it means that they shift a little bit because they realize why that works. And sometimes it means you shift a little bit. But I think those conversations are where you get mutual trust and respect for each other. And that, I think, is really key to building relationships, whether at a leadership position or any other position for that matter.
I absolutely agree. My fundamental approach is collaborative. As I've grown in leadership roles, I realized that I need to bring more of the solution or the recommended direction, but the framing is still the same. I think this is the way we should go. What's your feedback? People like to participate and feel consulted and feel included and to feel like they could flip the table if they needed to, but instead I'll just tweak this 1% over here.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So you mentioned self-promotion, which is something you tackle in your writing. And what has been that experience promoting yourself, and how did you come up with the philosophy you do about it now?
So about a year ago, the last company I worked for, a startup, went under. And at that point, I was faced with, like, I need to interview for jobs, but equally, like, is this really what I want to do again? Because I felt quite burnt by what happened in the last company. So I joined forces with a couple of other people and we decided to make a go of consulting. But as part of that, I realized that I had some good experience, but really no one knew me outside of the people who I'd worked with. And that wasn't enough to kind of bring clients in, really, I think is as simple as that. And so I thought, okay, fine, well, I'll start posting on LinkedIn. And I did it with a real kind of, I hate this approach to it.
Always works.
As I think a lot of people do. And quite a lot of like sort of judgment of myself as like, oh, this is so embarrassing. I can't do this. But the more I did it, a bit like anything, you get comfortable with it. But equally, I think you find what works for you. Actually, I wrote a post about this recently, but I think what is hard is when you join any kind of social media, be it Substack, LinkedIn, Instagram, whatever, you see what people do and you think, oh, I have to do that. They're successful, so I must do what they do to be successful. And there were a lot of things that I saw on LinkedIn and that I see on Substack where I'm like, oh, that feels horrible. Like the posts on LinkedIn of kind of, I scaled a company from 3 people to 100. Here's how I did it. Click playbook, like write playbook and I'll send you my 5 best tips or whatever. And they get so much interaction. You're like, oh, wow, okay, that's what I need to do then. And so I started writing these things and I was like, this is just not me. Like this feels so disingenuous. It's not what I would ever say. And I think it came across in the post because no one wanted to interact with them. And so for a long while, I was like, this is a total waste of time. I don't know what I'm doing. And then I think I just started saying, screw it. I'm just going to write what I want to write about, which is more about this idea of kind of, I need to promote myself, but actually I don't want to stand up here and say how wonderful I am. Instead, what I'll do is I will, rightly or wrongly, give you a bit of a kind of insight into how I think and how my brain works by writing my opinions. And so that's kind of what I've done. And that's how I've sort of started to, I guess, build up a following, but also promote myself, as you say. And now I actually enjoy is maybe a strong word. There are definitely where I get an idea and I'm like, oh, this is really fun. Like, I'm really looking forward to this. There are other times where I'm like, oh God, I need to just keep going because I've started. And so I need to continue. But largely, I'm enjoying it a lot more now. And I think I've got a lot more comfortable with it because I've found something which feels natural to me.
Right. You found that point of authenticity for you. And that's what you see time and again. That's what people are responding to. They're responding to your authentic personality when you're putting it out there like that.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people are looking for the the answer that, I want to know how you built a company up to 100 people really quickly. And that's fine. I'm really happy with that. If people want to go and look elsewhere, I did not for a minute expect that I'm going to please everyone. I've just found what makes me comfortable. And from my perspective, I think it's working. And I'm having more interesting conversations with people through LinkedIn and Substack now around topics that I really care about, rather than just kind of meaningless likes and great post kind of thing.
Right. That's really what makes it meaningful and enriching to your life. And as conversations, we got to sit down and have this conversation right now through that medium wouldn't have happened if you hadn't been putting yourself out there, and vice versa. You mentioned the self-judgment in there. It's honestly, having just gone through this kind of experience and getting over the hump of like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I'm putting myself out there and this feels terrible and all this stuff. And so there is a lot of self-judgment in that. And would you have any advice to anyone who's kind of facing that wall of self-criticism?
Yeah. And I think for me as well, I would say I'd like to say I only judge myself, but I hugely judged others for it. Like, I looked at people's LinkedIn and I'd be like, oh, it's so like stuck up. I can't believe they're writing that. And then you start doing it yourself. I assumed that social media by and large was a very hostile place. I thought it was largely kind of saturated. And so if anyone else came in, you'd sort of form a wall and people would be like, we don't want you here. And actually that couldn't have been further from the truth. There are so many people who I've found through social media who have been so generous with their time and so willing to kind of help and interact, whether that's like you inviting me on this podcast, or I interviewed a girl on my Substack last week who took the time to kind of talk to me about it. And these are people who, everyone has busy lives, right? Like, you don't expect people to take the time and say, oh, I find this really interesting. Like, let's talk more about it. And I think once you get over that fear of judging yourself and judging others, you realize that % of it is people who genuinely want everyone to succeed, with a few exceptions. Like, there's definitely some people who don't want you to succeed out there, and that's fine. But they are the minority, and I thought it was the reverse.
That's great. And you can block them, which is the beauty of social media. Yeah. And no, that's so accurate. Maybe there's an element of a view that this is a bit of a zero-sum game at first, and it's really not true at all. There's lots of people who are there genuinely want to help others or mentor others or just have great conversations and connect with other people. So it's a better, more positive way of looking at it. I like the way you put that. So then I think the other component, this is self-promotion in the social media space, but then there's the element of needing to or wanting to get recognized for the work you're doing in your job, in your workplace. So what's your advice for people in that arena?
And really, this is where I started writing my Substack newsletter. And the reason why this came about is, as I said, at the end of a year ago, the company I worked for came to a close and I had to interview. And I spent the time that one usually spends redoing my CV and updating my LinkedIn and all of that good stuff. And I realized that my profile looked like other people's out there. And probably worse than that, I had 2 failed startups on my CV. I wasn't like operations manager, operations team lead, operations director, COO. I did customer success and I'd done some marketing and I'd weaved my way through, which I see as a positive, because I'm like, well, I know why this side of the company works and I know how this side of the company works. And actually, when you bring it together, it's much stronger. But a lot of people want that like linear path and they want a lot of boxes ticked. And so I thought, well, okay, I've got to find a way to show people that I'm not just someone who's had a half-assed career jumping around different jobs. I need to tell them why I'm different. And I think that's where I realized that there's a fundamental difference between saying what you do and saying what makes you different at what you do. And I believe that everyone has that. But a lot of the time we spend a huge amount of time focusing on what we do and what we've achieved, not how we did it and why we did it. And that, for me, is the much more interesting bit. And that's why I started this newsletter, trying to kind of help people tease that out.
So, and that introduces the topic of expertise. You have this concept of quiet expertise. And that expertise is what is unique to you, or what is differentiated about you, which you can use to stand out in a crowd.
Yeah, exactly. So fundamentally, I believe that your expertise is a combination of what, whether that's technical skills, functional skills, industries that you've worked in. It's how your brain works, how you approach problem solving, how you process information, etc. And then finally, your experiences, so what you've lived through. So that's, I think, where the color in your CV comes out. So it can be that you've worked for a startup of 10 people and you've worked for a startup of 10,000 people. And it can be you've been through redundancy, or you've been in a startup that's failed. Like, that's where I think actually the color becomes part of your expertise and part of your experience, rather than something which you kind of try and brush under the carpet and hide. And I think that for me was like that switch moment where I was like, okay, I've got to stop hiding this and just being like, oh yeah, I failed, awkward, to being like, actually, I learned so much through this. Like, there's so many things I wouldn't do again. And there's things I would do again, but I learned that through failing rather than through succeeding.
Such a great point. You learn so much from your failures. And they're just indelible in a way that successes aren't sometimes. You like never doing that again, and your pattern recognition is super attuned to those things. Beware. So that's great. And it's really embracing all of your experience and telling a fuller story. So it sounds like that was empowering for you.
Yeah, exactly. And finding out how you can kind of show that that's what makes you unique and why that's important. And, whether that's for someone to hire you or to promote you or just for you to promote yourself. Like, I think too often we only take the kind of shiny things that we think other people are going to be interested in and we bury the rest. And my view is stop hiding a good 50% of what you've done that's like still really interesting. You're just not saying it because it doesn't have the A-star grade that you think everyone wants to see.
And this applies not just in job seeking or promoting a business, but also if you're an employee within a company, there are these same opportunities. Could you say a little bit more about how employees within a company can go about shining the light on that other 50%?
Yeah, absolutely. And I did a lot of work at Deliveroo particularly, but also in other companies, where a lot of my job was just making sure that things worked. The problem is when things work, that's kind of the baseline. But actually that means you're at 100%. Like, if things are working, you're doing your job really well. So how do you tell people that actually what you're doing is really quite tough and you're achieving a huge amount when you don't necessarily want to stand up and say, hey, look at me, I'm amazing. And so it's about building these frameworks of kind of, okay, actually this is kind of the data of what I've achieved. Like, this is how I did it. This is how to talk about it in a way that's factual and measured, without sort of standing up and saying, I'm so proud of what I've achieved and here's how I did it. And you can say that as well. Like, I think it's absolutely right, proud of yourself. But I think a lot of people in situations don't necessarily want to do that because it feels like they're showboating or, trying to kind of pull the limelight onto them. Whereas actually, as an employee in a company, if you want to get promoted, if you want to achieve your goals, then you have to be able to show people what the impact is of the work that you're doing. And I think a lot of the time we aren't taught in school or during work how to do that, unless we do something where the result is really obvious, like sales, where, you sell a customer and everyone goes, "Wah."
Yeah.
So yeah, it's about kind of surfacing the data that you have, the metrics you have, and then crucially turning that into impacts. Like, what did that mean? If you're an engineer, like 99% uptime, great. But like, what does that mean? That means customer support had fewer tickets and you actually save the company money and things like that. There's so many tangible impacts of what good work is. I think often we only think in our own function and our own headspace. We don't sort of widen it out to what the broader impact of the company is.
That's right. And you mentioned you were in operations. So similar to certain things engineering, sometimes you ship a product and everyone is clapping, but then, it's like air traffic control. Like, we're never celebrating the air traffic controllers. We We only ever notice their failure. But if you're in that type of role and you learn, okay, yeah, well, we're protecting $35 million of revenue or 100 million, whatever it is. And with this kind of uptime and comparing it to the past, then you can tell a story and communicate about that, yeah, in a way that is memorable and shows that you can communicate about these things. You understand not just what you're doing, but the business impact, and then you have this ability to communicate about it.
Yeah, I think the thing with that as well is that, you say kind of, oh, I've managed to hit 99% uptime, or like, let's take logistics where I used to work. 99% of our deliveries were on time. And some people will turn around and say to you, yeah, but that's what is expected. And I think whilst that's true, I think that totally belies the amount of work that came through to do that. And I think that's where being able to document that and say, okay, sure, but actually to achieve that, what we did was this. We collaborated with this company, this person, this whatever, implemented this process. We changed this. We saved money doing that. Like there's a whole host of things that happen behind the scenes to get to that. Yeah, but that's what's expected. And I think that's what people often forget and don't see. And that means that the people doing all that work, A, feel hugely undervalued, which doesn't do a lot for people's confidence or their enjoyment at that company. But B, doesn't let the other people know, like, oh, okay, like 99% uptime is really hard. Like,
Yeah.
that's a serious achievement. Let's stand up and clap them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's your role as a leader, is to tell that story on behalf of all the people doing the hard work, because you didn't do it yourself. Really you're facilitating that on behalf of the people. And that's just a great insight and message. So the visibility it's not about you. It's about telling the story on behalf of all the people doing this great work that you're helping to coordinate.
Yeah, exactly.
It gives me this image of like the electric bill. I'm not sending thank you notes to all the, there's thousands of people at the electric company. Thank you, by the way. Thank you if you're listening from the electric company. I really appreciate, and the internet. That's great. And then I have a couple more questions about expertise. How do you know what your expertise is? Like, what's valuable about what you know?
I think this is where there is this idea of, it's not just what you know, but it's how you apply it that matters. And that's where this idea around your expert signature comes in. Anyone can know how to run operations or how to run a product team. Lots of people can do that. But what makes your expertise different is everything that has led up to that. So if you kind of, the way I, again, using napkin, my funny drawing tool, the way I kind of illustrated it is like, your expertise, if you envisage an iceberg, you can see like the top of it. And that's maybe like your CV. That's kind of, you're a product leader and you've worked at these companies and you've achieved these things. But actually beneath the iceberg is the whole bit of the iceberg that no one sees. And that is what truly makes you, you. That's the bit which people need to kind of unpick to see, but it's also your responsibility to be able to tell people that that's the bit they're not seeing. And that's why you do such a fantastic job. And it's not just Claire, someone from operations does a fantastic job, or, it's that unique bit under the iceberg that is your expertise, that is unique solely to you. And that's why they want you, not just another operative.
Right. And sometimes that is your failures in there, those sets of experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of everything, it's your whole persona. You don't want to show everyone all of that all at once, because you'll come across as unhinged. But you want to be able to distill that into like a sentence where you can say, this is what I do, this is why I do it, and this is how I do it. That makes people go, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, it's not just, I can do operations, but like my thing is like, I try and untangle stuff. Like, I see the chaos and I want to know what's causing that chaos. How do we straighten it out? How do we make it into something which is neat again? I quite like using the analogy of a slinky, because my daughter's perpetually coming to me with a slinky that's in knots. And I actually find it deeply satisfying to unwind it and make it a nice slinky shape again. And that's kind of how I view my work. That's what my unique expertise is. I work at how to untangle the slinky and make it work again.
That's a beautiful metaphor. And we have all nice, healthy slinkies stretching and coiling
I'm
up.
so satisfied.
All right. Definitely add that to my shopping list then. So, and a lot of this is centering around communication. So, inside a company, there's some set of communications that are telling the story through data and then backing it up. Well, this is the story of how we got there and the results of it. And so that's making people care. You're building your expertise and your brand within a company. And then there's a similar kind of thing if you want to create expertise outside in the world through social media. You tell bits of your story either as social media posts or longer form posts. But each of these are individual and personal and are part of the iceberg under the water. You're hinting at more and telling more about what you can bring to the subject.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's one of the reasons how I felt more comfortable on social media, because it wasn't this, hey, look at me, here's what I've done. It's kind of, I find this really interesting. And the reason I find it interesting is because this is kind of my niche. And I think if I were kind of an employer looking for someone to hire, I'm much more interested in how someone's brain works and how they're thinking about things and their curiosity and the kind of questions they ask than necessarily they can tell me, they raised, 10 million for a Series A or whatever. Be impressive, but tell me how you did that. Tell me why you did that. Tell me why you made the decision to do that and what the trade-offs were and what did you learn doing it? Those things for me are the interesting things. And that, as you say, is the communication around it.
I'm just going to take a pause and cough. That hasn't happened to me before. Beauty of podcasts, it's not live.
Exactly.
I don't know what you'd do on a live stream. You'd have to maybe just go with it. People like the authenticity. No, that's fantastic. Well, honestly, this sounds like a really kind of a gentle path that you've charted out here, because it doesn't have to be, inauthentic to you. I mean, this is really about talking about you, what you bring to the role, and you don't have to put yourself out there in a way that makes you uncomfortable. And it's a way that shine a light on the good work you've done. I think you do a fantastic job of capturing that and being encouraging and giving people really practical frameworks to use and think about these things. So I really appreciate that. And I strongly encourage people to check out your newsletter to see what you write about there. But where can people find that?
So my newsletter, Shine Unfiltered, is on Substack. I do a weekly post there, and I'm trying to figure out what on earth the notes section is. So you'll see me post sort of really random bits of my brain that I should probably hide there as well. And I also post regularly on LinkedIn, which is more kind of, it's all related. So but I guess it's slightly more kind of work related rather than general confidence related. But yeah, I'm on both those places.
Fantastic. And definitely check them out. And if anyone figures out what the notes section for is at Substack, please let me know.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's just the algorithm in us. But Claire, thanks so much for being on my podcast. It was a great conversation and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great time.